The Ministry of Timelines bears no official responsibility for the content of this research. Due to radiative interference, the divergence point of the Accord's timeline can only be estimated. We estimate that it diverged 500 years before the present day. This record has been compiled from contemporary sources extracted directly from the timeline, though it does include some assumptions on the part of the ministry. (1945) Roswell, New Mexico. An incident that has caused the birth of a million conspiracies. It was one of the most important and well-kept secrets in human history. An alien crash-landed in 1947. What was kept even more secret were the psychological evaluations of the alien in question, probably because they indicated that mentally, compared to a baseline human being, he was significantly unstable. 1949. While attempting to escape Area 51, this captive alien was killed. An accident, according to the top secret report, having fallen backwards onto some bullets. The corpse was vivisected, autopsied, and the various jars of organs moved to a secure facility in Washington, D.C. In the same year, Japan Animated Films filed for bankruptcy. No one was interested in their work or work by similar artists, which was dismissed as being of little addition to human culture. A little-known genre called anime faded out of existence. The Korean War began a year later. The United States of America and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics both committed resources to the war effort, splitting their attention to the South and North Koreans respectively. 1951. Using insights about staged implosion design gained from the aliens' personal effects, researchers Stanislaw Ulam and Edward Teller made a breakthrough in the design of the world's first hydrogen bomb. 1952. Lavrenti Beria, notorious leader of the NKVD, and most of his staff were killed during a nuclear test. Stalin denied allegations that the test site had been wrongly signposted as a meeting place of the NKVD. The United States had a more successful thermonuclear explosion test, killing no top officials that the government wanted out of the way. Codenamed Ivy Mike, the successful detonation put the United States of America once again at an advantage in the nuclear race over the USSR. Later the same year, we were again visited by aliens. They came, they saw, they left in the shadow of a mushroom cloud, having taken the Roswell alien by force. It remained unclear whether the United States had used a thermonuclear device in an attempt to destroy the alien craft, or if instead the detonation was the result of a direct alien attack. Either way, the alien craft appeared unharmed when it was spotted leaving the upper atmosphere. January 14th, 1953. Fearing future attacks by the aliens, the US covertly approached the USSR in the aftermath of the destruction of Washington, D.C. They sought to form an agreement, wanting to combine resources and collaborate to ensure the survival of the human race. January 20th. Dwight D. Eisenhower was sworn in as president. His first act, off the record, was to sign the Tunguska Accords with Stalin. A bipartisan council of Russian and American appointees was established to safeguard the future of humanity. June. The Korean War ground to a stalemate. As US and USSR forces pulled back their support, Russian pressure mounted on the Chinese to agree a ceasefire. They instead launched a renewed offensive which broke through the disarmed US lines at the 38th parallel. July. Mark W. Clark, commander of the United Nations Command, used multiple hydrogen bombs in Manchuria, with secret Russian support and approval from Stalin, to break the Chinese supply lines. The Chinese advance was halted, giving the UN forces time to regroup and reinforce their front line. Fallout from the explosions blew west, towards Beijing and the surrounding area. August. The UN forces began a counteroffensive to push back the Chinese. The USSR used the pretense of this renewed American aggression to deploy more troops to Korea and displace some of the Chinese forces. A US-backed coup in Iran drew USSR attention as well. The Soviets offered military support to the democratic government, who readily accepted. Soviet armed democratic forces slowed the military coup but could not hold the capital. The Shah took power in Tehran, but what was left of the democratically elected government managed to escape to Tabriz. Civil war ensued. October. As the western part of the North Korean front collapsed, the UN reached the Chinese border under cover of heavy US Navy artillery support. With winter closing in, both sides began entrenching. In a bid to pull US Navy attention away from Korea, the People's Republic of China attacked the Nationalist Republic of China controlled island of Kinmen. The devious ploy worked, but when a US Navy warship attempting to arbitrate the dispute was sunk, the US declared their unilateral support for the Republic of China, officially opening war on the Communist People's Republic of China. In Vietnam, meanwhile, the People's Republic refused to withdraw any more of their forces pursuant to the Geneva Peace Agreement on Vietnam that took effect on the 23rd of July of that year. The US Senate then authorized the deployment of 180,000 troops to southern Vietnam to aid their beleaguered government. In other parts of the world, minor territorial gains were made by the UN in northern Korea. The conflict in Iran was locked in a stalemate between US-backed and Russian-backed forces, and the Kuwait Petroleum Company purchased large tracts of land from Saudi Arabia to help the Saudi government pay off their mounting debts. 1955 in the Kazakh SSR. As part of the still covert agreement between the two states, information passed over directly by the US allowed the thermonuclear device designated RDS-37 to be successfully tested by the USSR. It was detonated half a mile above Beria's unmarked grave, which Stalin said was a coincidence, but it's worth being certain he's dead. As the war with China escalated across fronts in Vietnam, Korea and Manchuria, the US moved to a more militaristic footing when the Senate passed legislation to reinstate the War Production Board. Russian attempts to stabilize US-Chinese relations failed. Under the direction of the Tunguska Accords, the USSR followed America's lead and began transitioning its economy to more of a war footing. Sputnik 1 launched humanity's aspirations to reach space and beyond. The Soviet space efforts covertly supported by the US government. 1956. As France and the United Kingdom forces deployed to Egypt in order to support the Israeli invasion, the United States of America detonated a thermonuclear warhead, destroying the Suez Canal. Through diplomatic channels, the US attempted to explain to her allies that the attack was in response to an alien incursion above the canal. NATO members from Western Europe were spectacularly unconvinced by what they saw as a gross overreaction, and fully condemned the US attack. In response, they formed the Western European Neutrality Agreement, or WENA, a new defensive military organisation clearly done without any consultation from across the pond. 1957. Mao Zedong, leader of the Chinese Communist Party, died of cancer, throwing the government into disarray as UN forces gained ground in the Hubei province and closed in on the capital of Beijing. Stalin gave the full support of the USSR to defend the territorial integrity of their communist brothers, and offered to arbitrate the succession of Chinese leadership until a new party chairman could be chosen. Under the direction of the Accords, US forces withdrew from Hubei and Manchuria, while Russians retook the land bloodlessly. 1959. Alan Shepard became the first human in space, launched from US soil with the support of the Soviet space program. Meanwhile, the USSR trialed a new technology reverse-engineered from the remnants of a crashed alien ship, bounding ahead with a quantum leap in the creation of the very first stealth fighter. 1960. After 3 years of procrastination by Stalin, Peng Dehuai is backed as China's party chairman. Dehuai immediately began the process of formally joining the USSR. The remaining wars in Korea, Vietnam and Manchuria continued, but in a very limited way. Under the direction of the Accords, these conflicts were used as little more than training exercises. Loss of life was minimized, a point kept firmly away from the attention of the media. Kept much less quiet was the maximized use of materiel. The Sudanese Republic became the independent Kingdom of Mali on 22nd of September 1960, achieving freedom from France. Modibo Keita, a descendant of the great Mansa Musa, became the first Mansa. Keita quickly established a one-party state with an elected farmer, or tyrant, adopted an independent African and socialist orientation with close ties to the East, and also implemented extensive nationalization of economic resources. In 1961, Kuwait became independent with the end of the British Protectorate. Sheikh Abdullah al-Salim al-Sabah became emir. Iraq refused to recognize the country's newfound independence, maintaining that Kuwait was part of its state, and refused to concede the territory following a show of force by Britain. Britain was forced to defend Kuwait when Iraq then invaded to stake their claim. Britain then launched an attack on Iraq. Stalin, glorious leader of the USSR, passed away peacefully, unlike the passengers of the car he was driving at the time. He was succeeded by Nikita Khrushchev. Iraq surrendered after less than a year of conflict, and Britain established a puppet government. 1964. A US-backed military coup succeeded in toppling the democratically elected government of Brazil. President John F. Kennedy also won a second term of office. 1965. Although a joint Soviet-US lunar mission successfully landed on the moon, the mission was sabotaged. Neither of the two astronauts getting off the surface, leaving the sole cosmonaut to return safely home. Outwardly, tensions mounted between the two superpowers. Kennedy was quoted as saying, "I need this like I need a hole in my head." Further powers were granted to the War Production Board in the US, whilst in Russia, weapons building is increased at pace. Led by the Kingdom of Mali, a group of African nations incite the African Spring. A fast-paced decolonization of Africa ensued. The liberated nations signed bilateral defensive pacts. 1966. Wiener member states leave NATO, ultimately leading to its dissolution. Neutrality agreements were signed between member states with the USSR and the US. 1968. The Kuwait Petroleum Company backed the Iranian Shah. The civil war in Iran ended within 2 months. 1969. A nuclear detonation on the moon was observed not only by astronomers, but by anyone happening to be looking up at the time. The resulting media frenzy pushed the US government into declaring a national state of emergency. Around the world, people fearfully watched the sky, anxiously hoping each moment would not be their last. The National Guard were deployed, and the streets would never again lack a military presence in the US, Europe, or the USSR. 1970. The Kingdom of Mali reorganized their treaties with other African nations into the Free African States. This movement was supported by the Accords, which the leaders of the FAS then joined. The Kuwait Petroleum Company, not quite understanding how economics and states functioned, nevertheless managed to convince the Shah to take their money, and they then somehow bought Iran. 1971. Another technology is created before its time thanks to alien intervention, and the first mobile laser weaponry is produced by the Accords forces. 1972. Stoked by Russian promises of support, the Araguaia guerrilla war in Brazil began. When the support failed to materialize, the Accords successfully conspired to eliminate the Brazilian dictator, and a puppet government was instead installed by the United States. They subsequently joined America's growing sphere by signing the Pan-Americas Treaty Organization. A coup d'etat toppled the Chilean government in 1973. Pinochet's fragile position was made clear by the Accords, and he promptly agreed to join Peto. In the following years, the remaining South and Central American states lacking any support from the USSR either joined Peto or were replaced with governments sympathetic to the United States that then promptly joined Peto. 1974. Under pressure from the threat of instability in China, the USSR recognized the contributions of China to the communist project and dropped an S to become the Union of Socialist Republics, the USR, or a C if you're more authentic and prefer Cyrillic, but we specifically don't mention CCP in this Stellaris channel. Computer researchers in Europe created the first connected computers in 1975. The Réseau Ordinateur Mondial, ROM, was born. All praise French ingenuity. And cheese. Mobile phones, or mobtels for short, manufactured in Africa, entered the consumer market a year later. An attempted coup in Iran was reported by the world's media, but the Tehran incident was more sinister on the ground. It started with air raid sirens blaring, sending some scrambling to shelters. Those that didn't make it or didn't take the threat seriously were never to be seen again. A few lucky eyewitnesses talked of strange ships appearing, nothing like they had ever seen before, and any craft in the air they did recognize as the Iranian Air Force fell from the sky when they came too close. The fallen pilots provided a useful scapegoat for the cover-up, branded as traitors attempting to overthrow the government, which the KPC thankfully managed to thwart. In 1978, a new single market and trade area was formed by WENA, dubbed the Western European Economic Alliance, or WEA. Thinking of branching away from playing cards, Nintendo was inspired by the brand name. 1979. The USR invaded Afghanistan. The Free African States supported the Afghan Mujahideen, who then waged a guerrilla war on the socialists. Though they lost all major cities, their attacks on the communist invaders were unrelenting. 1985. Moving one step closer to domination, the Kuwait Petroleum Company purchased Iraq. One more Persian country, and they would be permitted to start building hotels on their properties. 1990. Cannily exploiting their position in Persia, the Kuwait Petroleum Company created a synthetic algae that could produce oil. Transoil was born. The Arabian Peninsula quickly filled with Transoil algae production. 1992. Transoil expanded quickly, and in a move that rivaled the power of the Scheinhardt Wig Company, bought out their parent corporation, Kuwait Petroleum Company. They gained control of all KPC assets, aka the Arabian Peninsula. 1993. Transoil purchased Australia, a prime location for the cultivation of transoil algae, bringing them one step closer to passing go. 1996. Brazil got their hands on a UFO, in what came to be known as the Varginha incident, fundamentally altering the balance of power within Pato. Over the course of 10 years, they superseded the US in all economic and scientific metrics. 1997. Transoil crossed the Pacific and purchased Canada, or most of it. They left Quebec to become an independent state, not wanting the hassle of dealing with it. South of the border, the city of Phoenix experienced mass abductions and was put into permanent quarantine to cover up the tragedy. A mighty wall was built to seal away the city from civilization. That wall still stands to this day. 2002. Transoil, who by now have an almost complete monopoly I'm sorry, on the world's energy reserves, joined the Tunguska Accords. 2007. Large-scale force fields are invented, designed to protect strategic buildings and the largest of warships, although they require very large and heavy generators with massive power requirements. It offered protection from rogue nuclear detonations. Another breakthrough from alien reverse-engineered technology. 2016. The United Kingdom voted to exit the Western European Economic Alliance. An idiot on a bus convinced a surprising number of people that they would get great new trade deals with the rest of the world. The Accords approved the release of a gamified training simulation to the general public, codenamed Stella Universalis 4. Nerds were split between live streaming their games to audiences as many as 5 and complaining vocally about what happened to the first 3 games in the series. They were placated by the community team. Or maybe it was the release of DLCs Hearts of Neutronium and Zealot Mancers later the same year to popular success. 2017. Scientists working in the Free African States developed the world's first working fusion reactor. The FAS reported this discovery to the Accords Council and told them to ignore the various craters scattered around the country that certainly were not suggestive of failed fusion reactors. After much deliberation, the Accords decided the damage it would do to the worldwide balance of power would be too great for the fusion reactors to be brought into common use. Fusion was officially sanctioned only for use off-world and quietly hidden from the general public. 2020. A worldwide quarantine was enforced after a cyber attack on the infrastructure of Japan caused a deadly virus to break out. Major power blocks blamed each other. The Accords then disappeared people from hospitals and claimed they had died due to the Japanese virus. The nation of Japan, however, refused to go into lockdown, claiming the virus did not exist. Overnight, the entire population of Japan disappeared. The world's media reported that through the ROM, all of Japan's automation had suddenly turned against humanity. The governments of the world then shut down their ROM, fearing for public safety, allowing traffic across only local networks. National blocks maintain their own version of the ROM, but the international ROM no longer exists. The area of Japan was then sealed off forever. Coincidentally, nations around the world then refused to give up any of the new powers they had gained through this pandemic. 2021. A group of ecological terrorists protesting that the environment of a species of caterpillar would be destroyed to make way for vertical algae farming stole a sample of transoil algae and released it into the ocean. Transoil was unfortunately unable to reverse the unrestrained spread of algae, and it quickly covered the surface of the Earth's ocean. Where was Dirk Pitt when we needed him? 2029. Due to the sea algae covering the planet and acting as a carbon capture mechanism, CO2 levels fell globally, reversing the rise of the oceans and the trend of global warming. The downside was the loss of 99% of all animal biomass from the oceans, with almost everything below the algae layer now dead. Swings and roundabouts though, I suppose, ladies and gentlemen. Sea-based fishing companies also had to declare bankruptcy. International shipping was forced to return to a wind-based power mechanism. 2030. Invisible fighters were developed using cloaking fields. The fields were first deployed on aircraft and later modified for larger, more massive tanks. More massive objects were unable to be cloaked. The breakthrough came, of course, from Accord's salvage technology. 2031. Worldwide famines caused countries to enforce rationing, a measure that would prove to be permanent. 2032. Civil wars broke out in the United Kingdom as the country collapsed into economic barbarity. Weir-backed forces fought Pato-backed forces. The English Liberation Army fought the Ramonas. Europe was just happy the channel was there, algae covered or not. 2033. India, historically neutral, was annexed by the USSR as part of the Great Grain War. 2037. A minor border skirmish in Pakistan between the Pakistani military and the USSR-controlled Indian military escalated into a war. Weir secretly propped up the Pakistani military and economy at the behest of the Accords Council. 2044. Zeppelins emerged as the primary method of international shipping, causing considerable concern among those who simply weren't getting the core concept of helium being non-flammable. 2045. The Accords launched a project to colonize another solar system. They were able to launch a multi-generational colony ship from the asteroid belt by secretly and illegally using the population of Hawaii as a workforce. 2048. Where Johannesburg once stood, only a crater remained. The entire city was gone. The Accords explained it away as a mistest of nuclear fusion, an explanation that many South Africans were not happy with, but they doubled down when pressed with a worldwide ban on any further fusion testing. 2060. Scientists noted that the planet was beginning to warm again. Algae carbon capture only provided a brief reprieve to the issue of man-made climate change. 2099. The Llangollen Incident. An Accord extraterrestrial monitoring site situated in rural North Wales was sealed from the outside, with people still inside. It was never again to be opened. An extrasolar event destroyed the planet Venus. Was this a test shot? And was the Earth next? 2100. A United Nations mission under the direction of the Accords was established to monitor space for other potential world-ending extrasolar events. This was done in order to assure the people of Earth that they were protected. 2103. The Accords secretly set up a project on Mars to safeguard the future of the human race. Millions of people were then resettled to the airless red marble. The settlers began the long process of terraforming Mars. 2111. Cuba revolted and attempted to join the Free African States. The Pan Americas Treaty Organization sent in its peacekeepers to restore order, slaughtering anybody and everybody they could find. The FAS backed the Cubans and sent in their own troops. The war raged bloody. 2185. The secret project to terraform Mars was making progress. It remained a largely uninviting place to live, and the water was 90% recycled urine, but the air was almost breathable. Those resettled from Birmingham started to feel at home. 2198. The Free African States launched a Stop the Boats movement to curb the small boats refugee problem plaguing that bloc, particularly refugees from Weir countries. 2199. A rudimentary FTL drive was finally reverse engineered by Accord's scientists. This extraordinary advance was kept secret from the general population, who could still barely drive a car without crashing into each other. Which brings us to the year 2200. Wars are still being fought in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Cuba, along with the civil wars of the United Kingdom. The world is split between 5 major blocks which share power. These are Transoil, the original megacorporation. If you're a shareholder, it's great. If you're not, it's not. And most are not. They currently hold a monopoly on the energy reserves of the world. The Union of Socialist Republics, militaristic, isolationist, forever testing the loyalty of their citizens. They do, however, have the highest standard of living, no privacy, and they enjoy a daily 2-minute hate. The Pan-America's Treaty Organization. PATO is a backward block of paranoid weirdos who continually go on about the Reds. America is, at present, a junior partner, considered the most evil bloc by the rest, and that's saying something. Free African states, generally democratic, generally privacy conscious. They have the second highest standard of living, which has made it the prime destination for refugees, especially from the Union of Socialist Republics. Don't ask me how the boats get to the landlocked countries, they just do. Finally, the Western European Economic Alliance. This is lobbyist central. Corporations run pretty much everything, creating a bureaucratic nightmare of red tape that keeps the normal people trapped, and S&M adherents slightly aroused. This concludes our analysis of the pre-FTL age for humanity in this timeline. The Accords have allowed for secretive, centralized control of human civilization. Only further analysis will allow us to ascertain the level of efficiency for this organizational structure. Please refer to the next chapter of this report for further details on the Accords timeline.